Friends, we've been doing a mini module on business and the environment. And no mini module on business and the environment would be complete without the BP oil spill. This is the largest industrial disaster in American history, and it happened right off the coast here in the Gulf of Mexico and involved people, employers, workers who came out of Houston. So this is another reason to be proud of our fair city. Our city actually has many, many good things, many good aspects to it, so I don't want to just be sarcastic. BP is a multinational oil and gas company that is headquartered in London. It is one of the world's 7 oil and gas super majors. The lineup of its peers includes such household names as Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, ConocoPhillips, Royal Dutch Shell, Total SA, and Eni. It does oil and gas enterprises such as exploration and production, refining, distribution and marketing, petrochemicals, power generation, and trading. So it's known as an integrated super major. That means that they do upstream operations like the research, the development, the drilling. They do midstream operations, the piping, and they do downstream operations, the refining. The company was founded in the early 20th century and actually had its origins in the British Empire, but got second legs in the 1960s and 70s when many oil reservoirs were found in the North Sea, some in the English Channel, others off the coast of Scotland. Today, BP has operations in more than 70 countries and produces around 3.3 million barrels of oil per day. So it's certainly a gigantic operation. Let's focus in on the Deepwater Horizon blowout. On April 20th, 2010, that's exactly 11 years ago, 2 days ago, I guess. By the way, did you guys all see that Bernie Madoff died last week?
What?
Died at 82 in jail, in federal prison of natural causes.
Oh yeah, the guy who invented the Ponzi scheme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most famous Ponzi schemer of all time.
I was just seeing that on the test, and next thing I know, he's dead.
Yeah, died last week of natural causes. Back to the presentation, though. On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf Coast of Mexico exploded and sank. There were 126 workers on board during the time of the explosion. And fire from the explosions only went out after the rig was fully submerged, that's a typo, underwater on April 22nd. 11 people died. It was the largest marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry. Here's some pictures. If you've ever seen pictures of an oil fire, they're pretty dramatic. So I remember as a kid seeing videos of the oil fields in Iraq that were set on fire by the retreating Iraqi army as the American troops advanced. And it was really dramatic, these massive billowing columns of smoke filling the entire sky for as far as one could see. Here's actually a picture of the oil well blowout at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, some 5,000 feet down. And here's a graphic of the way Gulf drilling works. Gulf drilling is actually a very innovative, extraordinary operation. So it's something that most of the time when it works is truly a testament to human ingenuity. 87 days after the blowout, when the leak was capped, it was estimated that more than 4 million barrels of oil had been spilled into the Gulf. This was the worst environmental disaster in the history of the United States. After several failed efforts to contain the flow, the well was finally declared sealed on September 19, 2010. Here are the oil rig workers who were killed in the explosion, most of them from Houston, actually. There are both short-term and long-term reasons why this happened, and that's the part of the presentation that I want really to focus on as we talk about the causes of this. BP's internal investigation indicated that there were several serious warning signs in the hours prior to the blowout. Gas bubbled into the well. There was mud in the pipes that initially held down the gas and rendered the crew unable to know that gas was in the well at the time. The ignition source eventually was the released gas entering the air intakes of the diesel generators on board the rig itself. and then engulfing the deck area of the rig where the exhaust outlets for the main generators were emitting hot exhaust gas. That's why the explosion occurred. There were some other short-term factors. In any kind of large-scale drilling operation, there are always redundant safety measures. But the problem in this particular case is that the redundant safety measures all failed. So for instance, the cement seal at the bottom of the well failed. The final pressure test was misinterpreted by the rig crew. The rig crew also missed the warning kick. And at the end of the day, the blowout preventer did not work. These were various lines of defense. Incidentally, this is, I suppose, amusing in a morbid way, so take it for what you will. But the day of the disaster, BP and Transocean held a celebration ceremony on the Deepwater Horizon rig, celebrating 10 years of accident-free partnership on the rig. And this apparently diverted the crew's attention from the various dials and switches that they should have been paying attention to, and that was why the crew missed the warning kick and why the pressure test was misinterpreted. Okay, long-term causes for the blowout. These are the causes that perhaps are more interesting from an ethical perspective. One is loose government regulations. Okay, so the Department of the Interior, which regulates drilling operations both on land and on sea, exempted BP's Gulf of Mexico drilling operation from a detailed environmental impact study after concluding that a massive oil spill was unlikely. In addition, following a loosening of regulations in 2008, BP was not required to file a detailed blowout plan. Like with corporate scandals, environmental regulation tends to follow a kind of a cyclical pattern. When an accident occurs, like this massive accident, what will happen is there will be a groundswell of public opinion, and the government will dramatically tighten the regulatory climate, requiring redundant safety measures, requiring detailed studies of the safety procedures and so forth. But all this is very expensive and inefficient, and corporations like BP don't like having to go through many inefficient processes that most of the time seem not to be necessary anyway, because of course most of the time under normal operations these safety measures aren't necessary. And so what will happen is the regulations will be loosened, and another environmental accident will occur. The regulations get tightened, they harm profits and are inefficient, they get loosened, and the cycle repeats itself. Okay, the U.S. Coast Guard had also issued pollution citations for the Deepwater Horizon 18 times between 2000 and 2010 and had investigated 16 fires and other incidents. So certainly there were some foreshadowings of this big blowout. The Deepwater Horizon had also had other serious incidents, including 2008, where 77 people were evacuated from the platform when it tilted and began to sink after a section of pipe was incorrectly removed from the platform's ballast system. Okay, those are all interesting about government regulation and about foreshadowings of what happened. But probably the much more important long-term cause of the Deepwater Horizon blowout was decisions made by BP's corporate leadership team itself. Okay, and in particular, BP appears to have chosen riskier procedures to save time and money, sometimes against the advice of its staff and contractors. Business is never done in a vacuum. It's always done in the context of competition. And when competitors are taking market share from you or are finding more efficient ways to do things, it is also tempting to cut corners when it comes to safety procedures. And BP appears to have cut corners for a long time and eventually got caught in the worst possible way. Okay, so there was a lack of regulatory oversight by the government and negligence in safety measures by BP. There was an ignorance of the potential blowout by BP and Transocean, which was operating the rig. BP, on the whole, appears to have been prioritizing money over safety, something which works as a corporate strategy until it doesn't. And I think that it's important also to emphasize, and this is just my conjecture, but not something that I know for sure. I suspect that most or even all of the other Gulf Coast drilling rig operators were probably cutting corners in similar ways to what BP was doing. And ultimately, they didn't have a blowout, BP did. Probably it was an industry-wide cost-cutting phenomenon to use older safety equipment than would really be optimal, to use fewer safety procedures than would be optimal, and so forth. Okay, and probably also they all cleaned up their acts after government regulations clamped down in the aftermath of the BP blowout. So BP then didn't think about big picture issues. The executives at the company felt the rush and pressure of competition. They were not careful, taking shortcuts to save time and money, and were careless of the workers' lives. The CEO got in a bunch of hot water. He had been on vacation in Florida, golfing at the time of the blowout, held a press conference at which he made this memorable dodo quote, "There's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. I want my life back." This was seen as incredibly insensitive given the number of people who had died, and the CEO ultimately resigned. Let's look a little bit at the environmental and economic impacts. Some of the oil sank to the seafloor, causing damage to coral and other ecosystems. Oil washed up on the shorelines of a number of Gulf Coast states. A number of animals died. Animals died in the millions, in fact, including jellyfish, birds, sea turtles, algae, fish, and oysters. The economic impact included many industries, okay, leading to a large number of unemployed individuals all across the Gulf. Extensive damage was done especially to industries involving marine and wildlife habitats and to the fishing and tourism industries. The Gulf Coast, of course, is the main location for American fishing and also a popular tourist destination, and this was sabotaged for about a decade. Here's a map of the extent of the oil spill, and here's some pictures of oil on the surface of the water, and some sad pictures of animals coated with oil. Not the sort of thing that one wants to see. Ultimately, BP did it right in the aftermath of this enormous catastrophe. They contained, removed, and dispersed the oil through years of cleaning. 48,000 people were eventually involved in the cleanup operations. By 2014, BP had spent more than $14 billion, and workers had devoted over 70 million personnel hours to cleanup activities. Okay, the crisis brought the company to its knees. This is a multinational, enormous oil and gas company, and the company almost collapsed as a result of the crisis. In the aftermath of the crisis, they spent far more than they would have otherwise spent if they had followed standard safety procedures. And of course, you never know that the safety procedures are going to fail in a particular case. So you don't know ahead of time whether a particular low probability tail risk event will in fact happen. Most of the time, most companies that cut corners when it comes to safety procedures probably get away with it. But the few companies that don't end up paying very dearly. The U.S. Coast Guard was involved and completed the cleanup operations. BP allocated long-term funding for independent research on the restoration of the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem, its habitat, and the tourism industry. Finally, there were legal consequences. BP was sued by the Department of Justice. They settled claims with the DOJ for about $8 billion. Okay, there were billions more in other legal settlements. Company also pleaded guilty to 14 criminal charges, among 11 counts of felony manslaughter. They were fined more than $4.5 billion for that. $1.26 billion would go to a discretionary fund overseen by the Department of Justice, and $2.4 billion to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Long story short, lots and lots of fines, lots of litigation costs. Transocean, which ran the rig, also agreed to a $1 billion civil penalty. BP has since recovered and has gone on to be a successful company, just as they were for nearly 100 years before the Deepwater Horizon blowout. But it's been a long journey, and I should have included a picture of the stock price here. It's been a very long journey indeed for the company, but they have eventually managed to recover, although they're still paying some legal charges off as the years go by. Are there any questions or comments about this famous case? Questions or comments? Is anyone planning on going into the oil and gas industry after school? None of my students? Houston used to be almost exclusively an oil and gas town. Now we do other things in the city besides oil and gas, but we are still the oil and gas center of the Western Hemisphere for sure. And would I say even the world? I might. The refining is all done here.